place in the middle of the sun. And we'll sing this song, sing it one by one.
What's going on, guys?
Welcome to ID Podcast. How y'all doing?
How y'all doing? Sarah's Southern roots are coming out.
Yep.
Well, we are here still in sunny Oregon, enjoying the summer, and hope you are too, wherever you're listening to this podcast. And on today's show, we talk about something that I think is something we'll talk about more in the future on this podcast for sure, and has real implications this day and age, and that is how the digital age can affect your marriage or relationship, and the things to look out for, and how to basically set yourself up for success in your relationship when it comes to dealing with social media, your phone, texting, all of these things that socially, culturally, psychologically are having a real impact on our lives.
Yeah, I think, didn't Zach use some crazy statistic about the amount of people that are...
Yeah, 75%, is that the one you're talking about? 75% of divorce papers. He didn't reference the state, and we're going to... What? Divorce papers? What do you call it?
Oh, I thought you meant divorce people.
Divorce papers. No, he's saying the court that 75% mentioned Facebook in this particular state. Send us the data on that if someone wants to look that up, but I don't think Zach was making it up. So at any rate, that's an incredible number, and it's just technology. All this stuff is new to our lives and the human experience, and it has a real impact on not just our relationships with others, but our relationship with ourselves, with our kids as well. And I know personally, and I talk about this in the interview, that it's something that I try to work on and be more mindful of is my phone use, social media, comparing myself to other people and what they're doing. Even if it's not consciously, it's probably going on unconsciously for a lot of people out there. And I know I try to be conscious of it, and I know it has negative effects. And I don't think it in our particular case, with Sarah and I in our marriage, it's not too negative, although Sarah will be like, get off your phone, sometimes.
Only once in a while.
Only once in a while. And and she's right most of the time, and she doesn't say it like that, but
well, no, a lot of the time if I do feel that, it's usually because Stella's around, and
our daughter.
We just are trying to be mindful and of our media consumption around her. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a whole other really important topic is with kids. But today we have Dr. Carter on, and he did his doctoral thesis on basically this, studying marriages that failed because of social media, and a large part of it was Facebook, and how that created infidelity, whether it was just emotional infidelity or leading to an actual affair and physical. But he did an entire doctoral thesis on this, so he was definitely the guy to talk to. And Dr. Carter is an assistant professor of communication at Taylor University, and his teaching and research, he's also doing research, are all through the lens of social psychology, with a particular focus on how this new media, the digital age, is affecting our relationships. So definitely the guy to talk to on this topic. And I think it's just really important. We like technology. We are coming to you through technology right now. You're probably listening on your phone, and hopefully not also scrolling through Instagram or definitely doing something passive. But it's a great thing, and it's just important to be cognizant of how it's affecting the relationships in your life and you personally. And I know, again, that I can say it has great things and great benefits, but that there's many times where I'm like, man, this is kind of I'm go through the black hole of scrolling through Instagram, and I'm like, where did the last 30 minutes go?
We've all been there.
Yeah, and it's yeah, and it is funny, but it is really, it's almost a sad thing, like that's 30 minutes that I'll never get back, and so what? So I can look at like some cool pictures. Yeah, there's some benefit to it, and I might be inspired to travel somewhere, and there is some of that, but it's just really keeping it in check. And Dr. Carter gives some great tools, and also how to avoid the temptations that come along with reaching out to that long lost lover or on Facebook. It's so easy now, and he talks about how to navigate that.
Yeah, and you may be listening, and maybe dealing with temptations isn't something that you're dealing with, but maybe your partner or your spouse has an issue with too much consumption of social media. And so Dr. Carter also goes into some detail about how you can confront them kindly to work on that so they aren't spending so much time on social media. Yeah,
that's some valuable thing. Don't slap the phone out of their hand and say, get off there. That's not the way to do it.
No.
But Dr. Carter has some great stuff. And as always, we appreciate you guys listening, leaving us reviews, sending us emails, 5-star reviews. Those are the best ones. We especially like those. And hope this is coming to you and you are having a great day, and enjoy.
Today's show is sponsored by Talkspace, the online therapy company that lets you choose from over 1,500 licensed therapists. Get matched with your perfect therapist who can put you on a path to a happier life. For $30 off your first month, visit Talkspace.com/I do. That's Talkspace.com/I do. We have Dr. Zach Carter with us here today. Thanks so much for joining us today, Zach.
Hey, thanks y'all for having me. I really appreciate this.
All right, Dr. Carter, we've given our listeners a little overview, so why don't you take a minute, tell us about yourself and why you enjoy helping people improve their relationships.
Sure. My name is Dr. Zach Carter. I'm recently married this past year to my beautiful wife, Stacy. I'm an assistant professor of communication at Taylor University. I am a contributor for Psychology Today and Relevant Magazine. I focus a lot of my research and teaching efforts centered around interpersonal communication, specifically relationship formation and development, and more specifically than that, marriage fidelity. What really got me into studying marriage fidelity, it's really people ask me that, and it's really hard to give them a real solid answer. It was really just seemed to be laid on my heart about 6 or 7 years ago. I started doing research on an area of relationships that I could maybe help out in potentially as I was going through my doctorate program, and really just saw the research starting to come out about marriages being devastated and ending even from the internet, from text messaging. Which at the time was like really, through text messages, Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that. I was kind of dumbfounded, why is this happening? And so I started doing the research, did my dissertation research, got it published in an academic journal, and then started writing for Psychology Today, and really found that it was really resonating on people's hearts, that they were finding that they could relate so easily. I know on Psychology Today, they posted on Facebook. And though I don't have Facebook, I can still go to their Facebook page and see some of the comments. And it was one of the most popular articles that they posted. And people would say, yes, this happened to me. I had this experience, or I instigated this. People on there confessing that it really is an issue. So that stuff really, those comments fuel me to continue researching, continue writing, continue teaching on such an important topic that I really, really need as marriages in our marriages today to focus on.
Well, that just leads us right into it, and who better to talk about protecting your marriage in the digital age than someone that did their doctoral thesis on it. So that's what your thesis was about, was particularly focused on that, correct?
Yes, my dissertation did focus on marriages that were devastated, and actually only one married couple reconciled that I examined. The majority of them were victims of particularly Facebook communication that was laden with emotional or sexual dialogue that ended up in a real world sexual affair and then ended up ending the marriage, unfortunately. But yeah, that's what I focused on.
Well, let's jump right in. And what is the biggest concern that you have with the new era of technology and media in how it is affecting not just marriage? I would imagine it's serious dating relationships in general, but what is the biggest concern you have, and then we'll talk about how we can deal with it.
Sure. People, I hear the argument all the time, haven't we seen this in other communication mediums? I mean, sure, when the telephone first came out, you had people trying to commit adultery, over the phone. You had switchboard operators listening on the phone calls, and then they would tell their spouses. So there's always going to be issues with every communication medium, but it's learning to, I guess, steward well the new communication medium. Unfortunately, though, what we're not really seeing, what at least I'm not seeing, according to research, according to talking to people, and is that folks just don't look at Facebook, text messaging, and the words that they send and they receive as having equal implications to their marriage as maybe words that they would say, actions that they would do in face-to-face setting. So it's really concerning that there's this illusion almost, that it can't happen to me when I'm texting or Facebooking with the opposite sex, even if it's over trivial content, even if it's just about, how was your day, how's it work, et cetera, because 9 times out of 10, I really want to say 10 times out of 10, but as a researcher, won't say that, but 9 times out of 10, that type of content in the fairs I've seen, it starts with trivial content. You just don't jump into a conversation, have emotional confiding, or start talking about sex and what you want to do to each other with that type of that quickly. I call it kind of the breadcrumb effect. Like, you can look back on the affair and you can see how it transpired. Unfortunately, what folks aren't seeing with Facebook and texting is that they get to point 10 of an affair. Let's say there's 10 points, and they don't see points 1 through 9. And they look back and they say, wow, how did I even get here? When it's real easy to see that the conversation started very trivial. They maybe started talking about emotions and then sex, and then before you know it, they're having a real world affair. So my biggest concern is that folks just aren't looking at or viewing, the communication medium of technology, internet, cell phones as having equal face-to-face implications as online.
Why do you think that?
Why do I think that? Growing up, I have a very wise mother and father. My mom, she used to talk about culture as she would say, and maybe you all have heard of this, we're a frog in the frying pan, the boiling pot of water. The water doesn't start warm. It starts off very lukewarm, very almost cold. So we're the frog. We're sitting in the pot of water, and you slowly turn up the heat, and you don't really notice it. And what's funny is if you actually do this, it's not funny. I mean, I would never do this, but if you put a frog in a pot of water and you slowly turn it up, he will slowly cook himself from the inside out. And as graphic as an image that is, that's kind of where we're at as a culture, is that we can, it's classical conditioning. It's we're conditioning ourselves slowly, and we don't know it. It's as with anything. You drive to work every day, you condition yourself with the route that you go there and back. When you get home, you have a routine, and oftentimes you look back and you're like, wow, I don't even remember doing that. Same with Facebook communication, same with texting communication, and talking with people of the opposite sex. You can find yourself in dangerous waters, warm waters, without even knowing it. And that's my greatest concern for folks, is that they're really not cognizant. And that's one of my greatest findings I've ever found, is that people just aren't cognizant, truly just aren't cognizant until they actually have the affair. They're like, how did this happen? It just started off so innocently, because many people out there, they steward well their communication. They steward it well. And they can have individual Facebook accounts, and they can have text messaging service on their cell phones. But unfortunately, we have a proclivity in human nature to be tempted. And so there need to be guidelines in place, and there needs to be on how the self interacts. And I think, unfortunately, we're in such a narcissistic, hyper-narcissistic society today that the culture says you don't need to have guidelines. You just do what makes you happy. If bad things happen, you just revise them then.
So, how do we navigate this? It seems like you have made a decision to not use Facebook, at least saying that you check the Psychology Today page, but not through your account. So, obviously, that is a one step that someone could take. What would you tell someone that's like, no, I don't want to give up social media, and no, I don't really have a problem? How do we just be careful, I guess, and not let something like this, like an infidelity, even emotional infidelity, I think is something you touched on, but it doesn't necessarily even have to materialize into an affair in the physical sense, even meeting in person. But if you're confiding in someone through text or through Facebook, it can certainly lead to that. But even that is a form of infidelity.
Yes, sir. You hit the nail on the head there. I couldn't have said it better myself. Truly, one of the arguments also is, it's just words on a page. It's not going to hurt my marriage, even though your spouse may never find out the emotional confiding or even sexual confiding that you're having. What you're doing is you are slowly detaching yourself cognitively from your spouse without even knowing it. That happens. There's an emotional detachment that will occur. If that is consistent, if that emotional confiding, if the sexual confiding is consistent. So what are my recommendations? Because I know many of my colleagues, family members do have individual Facebook accounts. And that is not in and of itself evil at all. Many folks just cannot steward it well. And so, or they know that they may have a proclivity to being tempted. And so they have an honest conversation with themselves and they say, hey, you know what? I should maybe get off social media when I get married, or I should have a joint Facebook account, which I often recommend. It's not a possessive move because there's a fine line between possessiveness and protection, and that if there's possessiveness, you can kind of you need to have a castle in your marriage, and you need to have large walls to protect against the outside. But if you really have too many rules and you really become so obsessed over them, you can become possessive and you can end up burning down your entire village inside the castle. So you guard against the outside, but on the inside, you burn yourself down. So what I really recommend for married couples is really have just a sit down, one-on-one, honest conversation about your thoughts on social media, on text messaging with the opposite sex, specifically in social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever folks are using. Really need to be cognizant of the type of friend requests that they send, that they receive. They really just need to have an honest conversation with themselves. I see it sounds kind of like a cliche that you need to do that, but only you know yourself better than anyone. And so you really need to know, could this, in the long run, am I attracted to this person emotionally or sexually? Do I know they're emotionally maybe or sexually attracted to me? Is this a former boyfriend or girlfriend? Et cetera, et cetera. So really, it really starts there if you do choose to have an individual account. And then from there, it really goes to, just avoiding emotional and sexual content, even watching out with the trivial content, even watching for breadcrumbs. I call it, like I said, the breadcrumb effect, watching the breadcrumbs and seeing, hey, you know what, are they showing more interest? Are they messaging me real quick whenever I log on and it shows the icon that I'm online, I'm here. Do I have a proclivity to go and look at their page and their pictures, et cetera, et cetera. And then really knowing that it's okay to unfriend. It's okay to block. When Ak and I had Facebook, I had my own individual account. So did my wife. I had no problem blocking people. It's not that I hated them. It's just that I blocked them out of my consciousness, and that they were maybe across country, maybe it was a former significant other from the past. It's what I did because it was the right thing to do. I never wanted to even cross that bridge or even be tempted to. And so I did that for the sake of myself while I was dating and engaging, courting my wife, my wife right now. Who's the only wife I've ever had, by the way. And she's actually sitting here. I'm actually sitting in her classroom right now. We're setting up for her elementary class, and she's smiling back at me. I've been making palm trees all day. So back to this. It really, like I said, there needs to be an ongoing conversation because Facebook evolves. Facebook is always coming out with a new way to communicate more instantly, to be more connected. And as that evolves, the conversations that you have with your spouse need to be ongoing. Not every day. This isn't like you need to be constantly looking at your Facebook, your spouse's Facebook and vice versa. No, there needs to be a level of trust. There needs to be acknowledged there's a fine line between possessiveness and protection, but there needs to be an agreed upon understanding of what type of communication with the opposite sex is appropriate. One, but two, you also folks need to listen to folks like, this is not an arrogant comment, but myself, who have done the research, who have seen devastated marriages, countless, thousands, tens of thousands. The divorce courts in some states show upwards of 75% in the divorce records cite the word Facebook as one of the reasons that folks end a marriage. That is, whether it's a large amount of time spent on Facebook, but oftentimes it is inappropriate, emotional, and sexual-laden words were exchanged and affairs transpired, and that's why a divorce happened. So communication is a tricky subject because we're all, in a sense, experts in communication. We all wake up every day. We all communicate with ourselves intrapersonally, with others interpersonally. But it's just like a doctor coming to you and saying, let's say this would be awful, but he said you have cancer. You would listen to your doctor. You would learn, how can I get this cancer out? Similarly, with these researchers that devote their lives to this topic, you need to really listen to us that this can harm you. We can't be under the mindset that this can't happen to me. There really has to be a selflessness to it, kind of a breaking down of the self and really putting your spouse up on the pedestal on which you want to serve.
That is an insane statistic, 75% mentioning Facebook. That's really eye-opening. And there's so many directions that we could take this conversation. I think it's so fascinating. Personally, not so much in our marriage in the sense of infidelity, but in the sense of attention given to Sarah as my wife, and then our daughter. We have a 2-year-old daughter, and I get sucked in, and I consider myself a mild case compared to people, that are always on their phones. But I find myself, I'm scrolling through Instagram, and 30 minutes later, it's like I just went through a black hole, and it's like, what did I just do? And so I think for a couple reasons, definitely for the infidelity and talking to the opposite sex, being aware of that and setting those boundaries, one-on-one talking with your partner, hugely important. But just from a nourishing the relationship standpoint, nourishing yourself standpoint, I think it's, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here with you, but definitely our listeners, and I feel it myself, is that we live in a great time, and technology is evolving, and it helps us in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of things that I think it's detrimental towards, and the relationships with other people. Your Facebook friends are not real friends, probably. 90% of the time. I don't know. I've never met 95% of the people on there that I'm quote unquote friends with in person. So anyways, it's just really important, I think, to mention that, to be aware of it from a time standpoint. And then, have you heard of Tristan Harris? He's an ethicist. He worked for Google, and I've heard him interviewed a couple times, but it's pretty fascinating, the work he's doing. But what he likes to point out is that these companies, Facebooks and Instagrams and Snapchat, their design and their engineers are trying to keep you on their site. They want your eyes on their screen. It's not, we want you to have a great life and a great user experience. Yes, but ultimately it's to keep you on there so they can pay, make money. And there's nothing wrong with that in a sense, but he's trying to point that out and keep those companies in check and say, hey, the psychological impact and damage that we can be doing is pretty significant. So, I could go on, but why don't you expound on that? Have you heard of Tristan and the work he's doing?
I saw a segment. It was on the news a couple of months ago, and it discussed brain science. I had been starting to look into that this last year. Dr. Larry Rosen out of Cal State actually has done a lot of research on the brain and the implications that technology is having, and really talks about how developers are doing what you were just talking about, how for instance, phone app developers really create these algorithms that are individualized to your own personal needs. So it really records how much time you look at your phone. It really records you. So your algorithm is different than your wife's, and y'all's is different than ours, depending on how much we all look at our phones. And so let's say y'all have an Instagram account, for instance, and let's say you just posted a picture of your family. It will hold back specific for an determined amount of time, likes or hearts or whatnot, to really stimulate your mind in that certain moment. So, for instance, if you're out at the grocery store and you just posted the picture and you look on your phone, wow, you haven't got any likes yet. But after an hour, let's say you look down and there's like 50 likes, and that's supposed to increase your level of, hey, these folks are really loving on me now. And you log into your Instagram account and you use it more. So we're really being kind of manipulated, and I always come down as the professor that hates social media, and that's definitely not the case. It's just that we are prone to addiction. That's human nature. We can be really addiction can be to a degree good. I mean, I can be very devoted to my wife face to face and online to protect her, and that's a good devotion in my book. That's a good level of I am addicted to serving her. However, addiction can be bad, obviously drugs, alcohol. But what they're also seeing is that folks' minds are responding similarly when they log on to social media or social media on their phones or text messaging. They're responding similarly to how drug addicts respond when they take certain drugs, or alcoholics or gamblers when they go gambling. And so there really is no age limit now on social media. I mean, they say 13 for Facebook, but come on, all ages are using it. And so there really needs to be at some point, I'm hoping, after all this brain science research, and I'm actually looking to do some research in the next year that looks at anxiety, and whenever you're pulled away from your phone, do cortisol levels increase? Because Dr. Rosen has already found that blood pressure does increase when you're away from your phone for approximately 5 minutes or so. If you're one who's very addicted to your phone, you check it over 900 times a day. But I hope to do that too, to hope to add to the literature that there needs to be education for the young kids coming up, like in elementary school, of the devastating effects to not only relationships, but also the self, the way we think, the way we process, our cognition. Everything is changing, and we need to be aware of that because our relationships are really hurting. So I could go on and on and on too. So I'll stop there.
That statistic, 900 times in a day, that's amazing. I just saw, I think we were watching a documentary of some sort, and they said 150 times was considered a lot. And I thought that was a lot, but 900 that's
it said the
crazy.
The most addicted, it was 955, and they said it's approximately 50% of Americans is at 955 a day.
Wow. So let's say we have a listener who maybe they're addicted to their cell phone or social media, or their partner is, and they want to bring awareness to it. Do you have any insight on a good way to start the conversation?
Really is just sitting down, having a one-on-one, no distraction, so distraction-free conversation at the, let's say, kitchen table, no devices, and really just coming at it very in a care-fronting method. That is, you're not confronting, but you're care-fronting. You're coming to them and saying, I care for you, I care for us, I care for the development, the management, the success of this marriage. And I've really seen that you've been distracted at times. You have to come at it this method because we're so reliant on our devices, many people are, to such a degree that, or anything for that matter, that when you confront somebody, they don't want to give it up. If it's been benefiting them, nobody wants to really, it's really hard for us to admit that we're doing something wrong, and we're doing something to hurt ourselves or hurt our relationship. So you really have to be really gentle. It's like having an intervention with somebody. You have to be very caring. You can't, accuse, condemn, bring down. But rather it's saying, hey, honey, I've really noticed that your phone is really taking a lot of your attention away from myself and the kids. It just seems like you're not there, et cetera, et cetera. And then just saying, hey, I'm not against you ever using it, but can we have maybe some set, guidelines, not rules, but just certain guidelines for amount of time used, or, there's certain apps now out there that really could help with this endeavor, that really, they track your usage on the cell phone. And there's multiple apps out there that I recommend looking into. And that could give you an insight, especially the spouse that's really addicted to their phone, that seems to be on it a lot, to see how many times they actually do check it. And then they can have, wow, sometimes we need to see that. We need to see what we're actually doing. We need to be caught. We need to catch ourselves red-handed, basically, to see what we're actually doing. Because we can feel almost like everybody's doing it, or our spouse is looking at our phone as much as we are. They're on social media as much, et cetera. When our other spouse, at night is wanting to be loved on at night, wants to sit with you and cuddle and watch a movie without you having your phone face up on your lap. Because that's been shown many times, especially in my research, that communicates that you place an emphasis, you desire that phone more than your significant other or child. It really does. It subconsciously communicates that. So you really have to be careful.
Yeah, I think this is great. Just a big thing is bringing that awareness and making sure that you become present. And maybe it's an app to help track that. And then you say, man, I'm checking my phone 100 times, or I'm on it for this amount of time, and being cognizant of it, and then just trying to be mindful. I just heard a great little thing. This can be done with your spouse or partner, but it was, if you go out with a group of friends, the guy said, everyone puts their phones on the table, and the first person to grab their phone has to pay for dinner. So
I like that.
So the phone's on the table. So even, it doesn't even have to be social media. It's like checking the news. Sarah has these news alerts, and she just has them. She doesn't even pay attention to them. I think she just forgot to turn them off. They don't bother her. But even when I see her phone light up, I'm like this. I go to the primitive part of my brain lights up, and it's like I just have to look at it, and I'm like, you gotta turn that off. It's distracting me. But it's really crazy to how these technologies are designed to grab our attention, and how they appeal to these base levels of human evolution that draw us in. And that's why I'm saying, like, even I'm sitting here saying this, and then later today I'll be guilty of scrolling through my Instagram, and that's why I just think it's such an important thing to put out there that I'm always trying to be aware of. And let's kind of bring this back. So I think our listeners put down your cell phone unless you're listening to this podcast, which you don't need to be listening. You don't need to be looking at it to listen. But going back to kind of the infidelity part of being on social media and talking with the opposite sex or the temptation, at what point is it unhealthy? Because I'm picturing, let's say, a guy who has a female friend from college, and they stay in touch. To me, I don't want to say it's weird, but it seems very rare that happens, and it's in non-romantic, that they were never romantic at one point, or that it couldn't develop into something romantic. Like, how do you navigate that?
Or is he married?
Yeah, or let's just say he's in a relationship. It doesn't have, like in a serious relationship or married.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. How do I approach this? How do I say this gently? I'm a firm believer that one-on-one opposite sex friendships, one-on-one exclusive opposite sex friendships, are not appropriate. I understand I receive great backlash for that. A lot of my articles are very popular because either people enjoy them and they resonate with them, or they think I'm just crazy off my rocker. There are so many subtle verbal, nonverbal nuances face-to-face online that could bring those people together in a way that could damage a marriage, especially in a marriage, one-on-one. Now, as I say, exclusive, I do, will follow that with group friendships with the opposite sex can be acceptable. When done appropriately, when the both spouses are okay with the opposite sex friends, most definitely. But having a one-on-one, having somebody outside of your spouse that you confide in, that is so dangerous. It's like trying to swim in the deep end. You don't know how to swim. You're taking a chance. You're taking a chance that you will stay afloat, even though you may be able to doggy paddle for a little bit. Those things, one-on-one opposite sex friendships are very dangerous. And so when somebody reaches out from one's past you have no idea why they reached out. You don't know if they're having a reminiscent moment of maybe your past friendship, or maybe you dated in the past, or maybe they were just recently somebody ended their romantic relationship, and they're maybe looking for a shoulder to cry on, or they're just seeing they're wanting security. We place so much emphasis on getting in relationships for security. I mean, that's a topic for a whole nother discussion. And we put so much hope in maybe our spouse for being our salvation. That's once again another topic for conversation. But my point here is when people reach out like that, you don't know what the reason is. It's very abstract, and so to not even go there, that's when I recommend, and I talked about this at the beginning of the segment, going through your Facebook account, deleting people that you have a great understanding that they may be somebody that could be tempting for you, or they may reach back out to you, or you may just have a little inkling, maybe you never talked to them, just deleting them. There's nothing wrong with deleting people from social media, but with regards back to one-on-one opposite sex friendship, they're not appropriate because the emotional confiding, the connection that can occur is instantaneous. And so you can start the comparison game. We know the comparison can be detrimental psychologically when you compare your body to others, when you compare what you look like to others in magazines, social media, et cetera, et cetera. You do that same thing with your spouses. So if you have somebody that you meet with one-on-one, you go to coffee, you go to dinner, you watch movies together alone. I mean, you do these things that are so dangerous, and you're married, or you're in some type of courtship or engagement. You are giving to them what you should be giving to your significant other and spouse. You cannot, and this is one of the few times I'll say 100% cannot fully give to your spouse emotionally and sexually, fully to them when you're giving to somebody else. That percentage cannot be split up. So if you're giving to somebody else, it's split oftentimes right down the middle, 50-50. So great stewardship just needs to happen because, like I said, group friendships. I mean, I have colleagues of the same sex and the opposite sex that I get along with, I'm cordial with, I'm kind with. My wife does as well. But we have guidelines in place to protect against the potential possibility that somebody may try to infiltrate us. And when and if that happens, we have the guidelines set in place, so we know how to respond. We know how to be kind to them and say, hey, we're married. We're not going to do that. We're not going to hang out one-on-one.
Yeah, well, it makes it so easy now with Facebook. It's like, oh, let me see what that girl from high school is up to. And it, like you said, it may seem innocent, but there the breadcrumbs are starting. And I like how you pointed out that the one-on-one relationship. I think, and I like your opinion, but if you do have a friend of the opposite sex, I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you're in a marriage, but that needs to be shared. In that, like you said, you're not confiding in that person and not your spouse. Instead, that person but now becomes your spouse's friend as well. You may not be as good of friends, but you introduce them and the three of you hang out, or, I feel like, and that's probably a harder line to walk. Right. But I feel like some people might just be like, oh, I just can't talk to them. It's like, well, I think you can have that. You just have to be responsible in the way you do it. Mm-hmm.
I know, bring it on a personal level. I know in my past, maybe women that I dated in the past, we parted ways very cordially, because we knew, let's say one of them got engaged, and the communication just maybe ceased. And when I mean communication, I don't mean like straight verbal or text, but let's say, for instance, we're on Facebook and we're friends, quote unquote friends, and I noticed that we were no longer friends. I didn't give it a second thought because I knew that they had gotten engaged, they were in another relationship, and so it was one of those just was sort of the best and moved on. Now with friendships, it's tricky to navigate when you have somebody of the opposite sex and you get married, and how do you work that in? Do you work it in? Some marriages can coordinate this to a degree. It just depends if they're married. But in my professional opinion, I must say that that's just very tricky to do, and you have to be cautious. And I really would advise steering clear from that, if at all possible.
Do you find that the reason people will, in this specific situation, like you just said, choose to defriend once they've gotten engaged, is it because they're more tempted to possibly cheat on their partner, or is it just more out of a respect thing that the other person wants them to cut all connections with previous exes?
Definitely respect. For the most part, doing that out of respect is the prime reason why all those that I've ever encountered, whether it's in research or whether it's friends or family, have done that. It's not that they've been tempted. Now, that is secondary. That is, they don't want to be tempted, not just necessarily talk to somebody in a private chat that may lead to dangerous waters, but also pictures. I mean, pictures are very communicative. Pictures influence. We compare, like I said, our spouses to them, whether it's bodies, whether it's their families. It's the grass is greener effect, and oftentimes the grass is fake on the other side. And so we have many people have to be careful not to do that. So what they do is they unfriend, and but mainly it's out of respect. It's out of respect for, I do not want to make my spouse uncomfortable. I would rather, the thought is, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, I've heard somebody wiser than myself say this, that, I would rather make I would rather make another woman uncomfortable than my wife. I'd rather make that other woman angry before I make my wife angry. That is, he's not going to give emotionally or through words sexually to somebody else. And so if they get upset and they don't want to deal with it, that's fine. But at least their spouse still knows that they respect them. So it's really, I'd say 7 out of 10 times is out of respect. So,
well, Zach, there's so much we could go into, and we'll have to have you back on probably sooner than later. But if we wait 10 years, we can have you on and we could talk about virtual reality and how that's messing all up our relationships. And I say that half jokingly, but in all seriousness, it's only going to continue, this development of technology creeping into our lives, and not really even creeping, being just this center point of our lives, and keeping it in check. The work that you're doing is so important, and it's so important that the people listening are aware of these things, aware that the companies are trying to keep you on there, that to eliminate the temptation if it's there. All these things can help our relationships flourish. So really great stuff, and like I said, we'll have you back in a little bit. And I shouldn't have to say this, and I know you wouldn't too, but if you have Tinder on your phone and you're in a relationship, go ahead and just delete that app. All right. That's probably going to be one of the easier things you can do to keep things good. Now we got to move forward to the lasting love round. Before we get into the lasting love round, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, Talkspace. We all need to take a little bit better care of ourselves, and our mental health is no exception. Pretty much every guest on this show recommends talking to a therapist, either as an individual or a couple, to help improve yourself in the relationships in your life. And that's why we're so excited to be working with Talkspace. They're an online therapy company that makes it easy to connect with an experienced licensed therapist that you're going to pick based on your preferences for as little as $32 a week.
And how cool is this? You can send your therapist text, audio, video messages, or even do live video chat. Talkspace therapists are fully licensed and go through rigorous screening processes, in addition to thousands of hours of supervised professional training. To match with your perfect therapist, go to Talkspace.com/I do. And as a special offer for our listeners, you can use the coupon code IDO and get $30 off your first month, and to show support for the podcast. That's Talkspace.com/I do. Talkspace, therapy for how we live today. What is one tool or practice our listeners can use on a daily basis to help improve their relationship in the digital age?
Sure. It's really being just strategic with communication. Strategy is imperative in this life with our communication, both verbally and non-verbally when we see somebody, when we interact with them face to face, but also through a text message and online. you must be cognizant that what you say online, what you say through a text message has real world implications. And so really it's using strategy. It's saying, how could this come across to somebody else whenever I text it? Or how could this come across to somebody whenever I send an email or on social media? Especially if you're in a romantic relationship looking to potentially marry someday, and definitely if you're married, knowing that you can easily become detached. And if you're one of those that think I'm just going to get away with it, emotionally, psychologically, you're not. It's going to harm you. It's going to detach you emotionally, and so you really have to just be very strategic in your day-to-day interactions through digital media.
Is there a book or resource that you can recommend for listeners who want to work on being more aware of particularly the digital impact on their relationships?
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to say, I write regularly for Psychology Today, and concerning topics, not just with the relationships, but also improving, the individual self. We talk about blind spots in communication, those words and thoughts and actions that can come out of nowhere, and they can harm you in your relationships and yourself. And that's on psychologytoday.com/blog/clear communication, but also John Gottman, who is very wise, much wiser than myself, has done much research on marriages and what it takes for a successful marriage. So John Gottman has a lot of texts and resources that you can find on his Marriage Institute website online. And also Aaron Ben-Zav, last name Ben apostrophe Zeev. He kind of saw this coming before it even happened, and I quote him a lot in my initial research of my dissertation. I actually quote him in the first paragraph of 300 pages. That's how important what he has to say. It's called Love Online, Emotions on the Internet. And he discusses the changing landscape of digital and internet infidelity. And that, like I said, that was written, I think, back in 2003. It was right before Facebook. And so he started seeing this landscape change and what it could potentially go to. And unfortunately, that's where we're at today.
Great. Well, we'll be sure to add your blog as well as those other resources on our show notes page at idopodcast.com. We've been married for almost 3 years now. Is there any advice that you would give newlyweds?
Sure. Like I said, I'm newlywed myself, and so I take this advice to heart. I know my wife does too, but you can't be prepared. That is, thinking about those who are engaged. But if you're engaged, you can't be prepared to just give up certain freedoms when you're married, but more so you need to be willing and eager to give them up. It's a blessing to give up certain freedoms, the freedoms that you had when you were single. The first year is often the most difficult, statistically speaking, for newlyweds. You have two individuals basically looking to become one collective unit. You'll never really know how selfish you really are until you marry. But when you're married, you must give up freedoms that you once had, like I said, as a single person, especially when it comes to the opposite sex. Like I said, this is not advice saying you must cut off opposite sex friends. As group friendships can be very beneficial to our community needs as humans, but it's advice suggesting that avoiding exclusively one-on-one opposite sex friendships, especially through text, can really help develop that first, especially first year, first 2 years, first 3 years of marriage, that foundation, so that you can have a strong, Lord willing, lifelong marriage. Until death do you part. So it goes back to that first question. It just takes strategy and intentionality to really serve your spouse, and that servitude goes above and beyond when you're not with them. That is when you're in a digital space such as your Facebook or a private text message.
Is there any particular advice you would give our single listeners looking for a happy relationship? Sure. I think the phrase, marriage takes work has become kind of a cliche, and I think it sometimes turns single folks off from marriage. I mean, there's a lot of things that, unfortunately today in our culture, it turns folks off from marriage. But the truth of the matter is, it truly does. Apathy, indifference, and even a prideful and oftentimes narcissistic view of, this can't happen to me attitude is not going to contribute to a successful marriage. So really it's preparing yourself as a single person. Say, there's a lot of people, the statistic, it fluctuates every few years, but between 90 and 100%
not 99%, 90 and 98% of folks in any given community will end up marrying. It just depends on the locale. And so really it just takes preparing yourself to knowing that the person you're dating may not actually be your future spouse. So really it's looking at the person as somebody else's spouse and respecting them and guarding hearts. And just looking after, saying to yourself, hey, how I communicate with you face to face and online, I want to respect you for your future spouse. If you're not mine, and if you're not in a relationship, it's really preparing yourself to be able to have that heart of servitude, to look at your spouse as more important than your own self. Because if you go into a marriage with it's all about me, there's going to be great devastation, especially that first year and subsequent years if you remain with that mindset.
Well, that's great advice. And you're right. It is kind of a cliche that marriage takes work, and I'm sure you can agree with us, is that it's worth it. And listening to these podcasts or reading articles that, you've written, or doing your own reading and trying to work on your marriage, it's not easy, but it is worth it, and the reward is great. So
right.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been a great interview. So let's wrap up by having you tell our listeners where they can find you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Like I said, I write for regularly for Psychology Today magazine. I write also for Relevant magazine online. My Psychology Today blog column can be found at psychologytoday.com/blog/clear-communication. Like I said, I'm also an assistant professor of communication at Taylor University. You're always welcome to come and attend a class if you're a student someday. I don't know.
Great. Well, all of those links will be on our website at idopodcast.com. And again, we appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks, Jason and Sarah. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the show. If you haven't signed up for our 14-day Happy Couple Challenge yet, head on over to our website at idopodcast.com/14 to sign up today.